I manage the trees across all 8 of the Royal Parks, the Longford River, Brompton Cemetery, Victoria Tower Gardens, and as I said, the 8 Royal Parks. So myself and 3 other tree officers, we look after around the 160,000 trees we've got across the 5,000 hectares of estate. So I know the trees in Bushy Park and all of the 8 Royal Parks quite intimately, so we're going to have a wander around and look at some of the rare and more unusual trees that we've got in the Woodland Garden, or the pheasant tree, and then up into the Woodland Gardens. We've got a lot of interesting trees in the pheasant tree in the Woodland Gardens. This is the sort of more parky bit of Bushy Park. As you well know, the Deer Park area is more naturalised, so we have a lot of more interesting trees in here, more exotic trees. So we're going to have a look at some of them. We can't look at all of them, obviously, because there's far too many. We've got a lovely cedar here. This is an Atlantic cedar, okay, and these trees are sometimes known as cedar of Lebanon's, but there are actually 3 distinct different versions of cedar trees that we have. This particular one, as I said, is an Atlantic cedar. So this one's native to the mountains in northern Morocco up through Algeria, whereas the cedar of Lebanon is native in the Lebanese mountains. And then we have the deodar cedar, which is native to the Himalayas. So this particular tree is probably around 150 years old. You probably noticed as we were coming up the park, there's a distinct lean on the tree as well. So this was partially windblown about 2 decades ago, so it's got a bit of a lean. And those of you with history in Bushy Park, if you remember, the footpath used to go across there and underneath the tree, and this basically gave us a bit of a headache, in so much as the tree has a bit of a jaunty angle. We weren't quite sure of the root stability on this side of the tree, and there was a footpath running right underneath of it. So we looked at it and we thought, well, we're not cutting the tree down. Okay, we're going to go and take the opposite view, and we're going to move the path. So a fair bit of planning, and you can see now the new path runs down through here. We also had the difficulties of the root systems of these old oak trees and everything to deal with. So we went for a no-dig path solution. So this path actually sits on top of the ground. So we didn't excavate the soil at all. We built a new path sitting on top of the soil and then built the sides up. So what you're seeing here with this new grass is where the soil has built the path back up. So we didn't damage any of the roots of the trees, but we've created this new path around. And we can leave the cedar to do its thing. It probably won't fall over, but we don't care now if it does. Well, we do, obviously, but now there won't be anybody in the vicinity when it does. The other thing as well is we fence the trees off. We're doing this more and more now because the whole risk environment in today's society is very high, and litigation and all of the aspects of, trees dropping bits off or falling over and injuring or worse. We now have to do a lot more of this exclusion zone. So rather than damaging the trees by pruning or removing the trees, we exclude people from the areas, and that way the trees can carry on giving us all their benefits, but without any of the disastrous consequences of natural living organisms. Basically. To the left of the cedar, this one here, this is one of our champion trees. So champion trees are the biggest of their species growing in the British Isles. So there's a tree register of the British Isles, Troby, and it contains a list of all the largest species that we have growing in this country. So the largest oak trees, the largest cedars, and this Acer, this maple, Acer monospecilanum, the Montpellier maple, this particular tree is the largest one in the United Kingdom. So this is it's very similar to our field maple, but this is the European sort of version of it that grows much further south in France, so around the sort of Mediterranean area, and and it's a very, very attractive tree. but not one that you would particularly look at in any, with any reverence until you suddenly think, oh, actually, that's the biggest one in the country. There you go. This one is Mespulus germanica, or the medlar, and yes. So, as I say, it's a relative of the apple, belongs in Rosaceae family, has the strange, quite sort of gobstopper-sized fruits, very, very hard until they're hit by the frost and blessed, and then you can eat them, and they still taste awful. But back in the day, they would make jams and things like that from them. As with all good gardens, some of the best ornamental trees, the Japanese maples. So this one's Acer palmatum, which of course I am demonstrating on my shirt as well. The Japanese maples, this one has some mistletoe as well on it as well, which seems to be dying back a bit. Some of the most highly regarded ornamental trees, and certainly highly regarded in Japan, where there are huge collections. So this one species has somewhere around 1,500 different cultivars or different variations of it. It is very genetically unstable, so it will produce from set seed batches a lot of genetic mutations. So red-leafed varieties, leaf variation, dissected leaves, variegated leaves, so a very large amount of variation. So you'll never ever sort of see one Japanese maple. There'll always be different variations of them, and this is a particularly nice one. They're a little bit fussy as to where they grow. They like a bit of shade, like a bit of moisture at the roots and everything as well. And the squirrels take quite a fancy to them and gnaw the bark on them, so you'll find quite a few that are stunted as well. But this one's a very, very nice specimen. I think what we're here for really is the swamp cypresses. Yes. So you can see there's quite a few of them. We'll move a bit further down. So this is a swamp cypress, Taxodium disticum. And it belongs to the deciduous conifers, so much like the ginkgo, but a different subsection. But these are, again, native to the eastern United States in swampy areas, hence the name. The knees that you see here are botanically called pneumatophores. Now, it's interesting because nobody actually knows what they do. So there's a lot of supposition as to what they do, but nobody truly knows what their actual job is. So they say that they use them as snorkels to allow the roots to diffuse oxygen whilst they're underwater, but they've actually cut them off on trees in the wild and made no noticeable difference to the trees. So there's one theory out the window. Other theories are that the tree develops these, or has developed these over time, to trap silt around the base of the tree to sort of up the content, the mineral content of the soil, so that they can grow more efficiently. But again, nobody truly knows. So they're a bit of a mystery, and they are absolutely intriguing. Somebody was describing them as meerkats. It's a very good description. Fairy castles is one of my students called them before, but this one is a particularly good example. I don't think I've seen any that make it to 4 foot tall like these ones. I think that there was some discussion on veteran trees and champion trees and ancient trees, and so to clarify what they all are, I think you can guess the champion trees are the largest trees in the UK. So there are people that spend their weekends going around the states measuring trees, and there's a register of trees in the British Isles of which they compile all the information. So basically the top 4 trees will be in that register. You can join it. TROBY is the initials, which is Tree Register of the British Isles. And you can download the PDF with all of the fascinating sizes, and if you're into that sort of stuff. So champion trees are effectively the biggest or the largest in circumference and height. Okay, so the height is usually the critical one, because certainly you'll get, you know, fat, short trees. But the height is the one that they go on, and then circumference after that. So that's trophy. So those are champion trees. Veteran trees are trees which are old, okay, and have a set of what is known as veteran features. So normally 5 to 8 veteran features would classify the tree as a veteran tree. So if we're looking at cavities, deadwood, fungi, pools of water in the trunks, in the cavities, heartwood decays, all of these sort of different features, mosses and lichens, epiphytic plants and things like that, contribute towards it being classified as a veteran tree. So it's normally the features, the trees behind us, we call those quite old for the Acer cappadocicums that they are, but they don't have enough veteran features. There's no nest holes, there's very little dead wood. There's a bit of dead wood on there, a bit of dead bark, but they wouldn't have enough features to make them veteran trees. Whereas you can see the tree through there on the other side of the riverbank, you can see there's a large hole in the stem. It's quite old for an alder, and that would have enough veteran features to make it a veteran tree. The same with the oak behind us. So ancient trees are veteran trees, but they are old for their species. So if you think of a hawthorn would be ancient at around 150 to 200 years old. An oak we would consider ancient over 400 years old. So they are trees that have attained a very old age for their subsequent species. Birch trees, for instance, at 100 years old, they would be considered ancient because they don't live very much longer than 100 years. So that's the difference. So all veteran trees have sufficient veteran tree features to classify it as a veteran, and ancient trees are veteran trees which are very, very old for their species. So that's the difference. So these are Pinus coulteri. They're native to the western United States, so the Rocky Mountains, California, and thereabouts. And they're called the big cone pine or the knob cone pine, although sadly they're coneless, because you could just see a few up in the upper canopy of the tree over there. Yeah, so right at the tippy top you can see the cones. They're about half the size of the ones in the United States. The ones in the United States are often the size of a small waste paper basket. They're quite large, and due to the fact that they do occasionally fall out, we have to periodically, so once every 3 or 4 years, we send the tree surgeons up there to remove the cones. So they don't fall on people's heads. They don't fall on people's heads. Exactly. Yeah. So they weigh probably 5 kilos or so. So from 20 metres, that'd make a big dent in your head. And they're quite prickly and sharp as well. The bits that go in. Yes. So you can see these ones have recently been deadwooded as well, just to tidy them up a little bit. They're not particularly happy with the climate here. It is a little bit grey and miserable for them, as you can imagine, where they grow, where they're native to. Okay, bright sunshine pretty much year through. So these ones have done very well, but the ones in the United States, 2-3 times the size of these trees.
How old would these be roughly?
They must be getting on for 100 years old, I imagine. Yeah.
But does it mean they might cope better with climate change?
They're probably thinking, yeah, bring it on, because they would be better adapted. Yes.
How many years does it take for the cone to reach final size when it will then fall off?
It's difficult to say. It is difficult to say, because it isn't a predictable thing. They tend to, because they form in groups of 3 around the branch, then it's not the cone falling off, it's the branch breaking. So if you like to get 3 on your head at once, So that's our consider. And again, the risk of it's fairly minimal because we don't come here regularly finding people lying with cones in their heads, nor do we find very many cones on the floor. So it is a bit of a risk management thing that we do undertake. But you know, there's so many people visit the parks and picnic around here.
Suppose they said they call it Widowmaker.
Yeah.
Because,
And deciduous trees, obviously, like the oak trees, broadleaf deciduous, and conifers. The family is differentiated by the type of wood. So the type of wood in broadleaf deciduous trees or broadleaf evergreen trees, for that matter, is made up of vessels, long vessels that link together with water transport, whereas conifers have tracheids, which are individual cells that link together and have valves that join them. So yeah, it's a bit of a technical differentiation, but that's a conifer, that's a broadleaf deciduous tree.
So I thought they were differentiated by how they reproduce.
And reproduction,
oh, right,
yeah,
right.
but
So
essentially
so
the
it's
main...
seeds or conifers or cones.
Yes, but
okay.
then if you think of alders, they
Yes.
have cones.
Oh right, okay.
So
okay.
so yeah, Mother
Yes.
Nature
Okay.
can never generalise.
Right, okay.
Unfortunately, yeah, because she throws spanners in the works all the time.
Right.
Cypress is a conifer.
There's a conifer, yes.
So
Although it
but
drops its needles every year.
But its structure inside is
It's tracheids rather than vessels.
right.
So we just stopped here to take in the fragrance. So the Japanese azaleas that you can see around us. This one is Azalea lutea. Used to be Rhododendron lutea. Obviously, rhododendron and azalea are very similar, same family. So Azalea lutea is one of the scented azaleas. Frequently, they're very colourful, but they don't have any fragrance. But this one, as you can smell, very popular with the bees as well. They're notoriously difficult plants to grow. They require acidic, moist soil. They love overstory semi-cover, so they bit of sun, bit of shade. So very fussy plants, and they have the horrendous habit of just dying as well. So you admire a fantastic display one year, you come out the next spring and it's dead. The Tibetan cherry, which we can see as we're here as well, with this beautiful mahogany bark on it. Very attractive trees, very popular with garden designers, and you can see why, really.
Yeah.
And the bark, it naturally sheds, but they do appreciate a good rub as well to get the algae off and keep that shine on the stem. So yeah, very beautiful tree. Do you remember when this was all full of rhododendron in here?
Oh, yes.
Really deep, dense, horrible rhododendron,
Yeah.
which we've got rid of now and opening up all of these prospects. There's a lovely Japanese Sorbus, Japanese rowan just behind the azaleas there with the large panicles of flowers on. Gorgeous autumn colour.
Yeah.
That one's Sorbus commixta Olympic Flame.
We've
So,
got that, haven't we?
yeah. And they're looking very lush this year. So
Yes, aren't
Yes,
they?
terrific. Yeah.
this is it. These are the sort of trees that will now get planted in here. They like a little bit of overstory, acid soils, and a bit of moisture at the roots, and they're good to go. So yes. So the Royal Parks have a very strict biosecurity policy. So we do not buy any plants from Europe whatsoever. We buy from UK nurseries only. Now, they sometimes source plants from Europe, but our insistence is that they've been grown in this country for a minimum of a year. So to operate as a nursery in the United Kingdom, you have to have DEFRA, so the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, or something I think it is, has to make a visit to the nursery, an inspection visit every year, and then you get a certificate from DEFRA to say you're allowed to operate for another year. So all of the nurseries that we purchase from have strict biosecurity controls themselves. So when they purchase plants from nurseries abroad, they are kept in isolation, grown in isolation, under observation, and then sold on with a guarantee or a plant passport that guarantees that they're disease free.
So is that what that plant passport is when you buy in a garden
Yeah.
centre then? Oh, right.
Yes, so particular trees, especially rosaceous trees like apple trees and things like that, that carry certain diseases that we don't want in the country, have to have a plant passport that assures that they're grown free of viruses and diseases. Yeah, we've only got around 40 native trees. And a lot of them are really boring as well. So dependable and British, but boring. They don't do a lot. So yeah. So when you plant in gardens and parks, you want stuff that makes you go ooh, or smells lovely. And
Diversity.
yeah. So you have your diversity, but you have a few cheeky little immigrants as well that shine in the corners. Just stop to have a look at the Diamo oak. This is Quercus dentata, native to Japan and China. You can see it has these ridiculously large, very similar leaf shape to Quercus robur, but 20 times the size. They are a very curious tree. This one's not a really good representation. As I say, they're native to Japan, northern Japan, and the Sakhalin Islands and the Amur River side of China. And so they are sort of in that curious category of trees which are hardy but don't really like our climatic conditions. So where they're native to, it's either winter or it's summer. Okay, they don't have this fade that we have at either end. So they don't have springs. Okay, it's absolutely freezing bloody cold, and then next day it's hot. So they don't have any confusion. So they know, all right, it's hot today. Right, let's send our leaves out. Whereas here, you might get a nice warm day at the end of February, beginning of March, and of course they go, oh yeah, and then frost, and then of course they suffer terribly. And it's the same with the summer as well, as they grow on, because the autumn it's not set up for the signals of spring and autumn, so it doesn't drop its leaves quite when it should. So it's hanging on to its leaves, and then suddenly it's cold and horrible. So yes, the other curiosities here, Viburnum opulus, when you're on the native plants, that's a native shrub, although this one's the cultivar called Snowball. Can you guess why? Truly awful shrubs in my opinion, but yes, you know, everyone to their own.
They just bite into the stem there,
They
and
do,
then
don't they?
that's the
Gotta
parakeet's
encourage
doing.
that.
Is it?
Yeah,
I hate the gunnerer.
I do as well.
I hate
Do
parakeets.
you?
I think it's fun.
Really?
I agree. Every time I see it, I think, why do they do it?
See what I mean? See, Viburnum Snowball, yours is Gunnera Manicarta.
It is, neither gunner.
But this has always been a marshy area in the Woodland Gardens, and the Gunnera fries here as it can be seen. Yeah, so the parrots, it seems, have taken a fancy to it. You can see where they've bitten through the tops for whatever reason. Well, I don't. Well, I won't use the word, but anyway, the ones in Hyde Park pull the flowers off the cherry trees in the spring for no apparent reason other than it's fun, literally. There's one particular tree in the front garden which is absolutely spectacular, used to be spectacular. Very early pink flowering tree. The parrots just sit there all day, to the point where the bees are actually visiting the flowers on the floor. Behind us we've got Betulus nigra, which is commonly known as river birch. Has this wonderful flaky bark. And again, another moisture-loving birch tree. Very, very attractive. Planted here as a multi-stemmed as well. Bit garden designy, I think, for a woodland garden, but we'll let them off. It wasn't my choice. We got other things in here. Obviously, we were talking about native. Somebody asked me the question as to native trees. We've got a native tree here. The large tree behind us is an alder, Ulmus glutinosa. And native trees are trees which effectively have grown in the United Kingdom, or the British Isles, let's call it geographic, so grown in the British Isles since the last ice age. Okay, so effectively the ice age, the ice sheet came down to almost southeast of England, and everything above there was obviously died in the last ice age. So one or two surviving plants, and the rest repopulated over the English Channel while there was still a land bridge until the English Channel was formed, and then we became a separate island. So that's why we have a very limited flora and fauna compared to mainland Europe, because it didn't have very long for everything to move across the channel while it was still land. And we only have 3 native conifers as well. Who can name those? Scots pine, well done. Think about churchyards. You. Yes, and the other one, gin, think gin. Juniper. That's your 3 native conifers. Scots pine, juniper, and yew. Good to go. Yeah, so we finished by the totem pole. I think it's a nice point to finish. We were talking about sycamore, which we are debating as to whether it's a native or not. Has these wonderful sort of bunch of grapes flowers you can see hanging down underneath. Much maligned, people do hate it because it seeds everywhere, in gardens in particular. Or Canada geese with some little chicks as well, look. Food for the herons. But the interesting one is behind us. These are quite rare in the UK. So we have swamp cypress, Taxodium disticum. This is the pond cypress. This is Taxodium ascendens. And if you look at the foliage is very upright on the branches and very distinctly frond-like. Do you know horsetail, the weed you get in the gardens? Very, very, very similar looking to the horsetails. This is native to the same areas as pond cypress, but this one tends to be more northerly outlying. So pond cypress, Taxodium ascendens. As I say, very, very unusual to see in the UK. That's about it. Any sort of questions? We're going to sort of finish about here now.
Well, just as you mentioned it,
Yeah.
Are trees not fighting back against it now?
Ash dieback?
Yeah.
It's interesting because I would say probably 95% of the trees that get it do succumb to it. Oh. And there's a 5% or so disease resistance, which of course gives you hope that all the ash aren't going to die. Very, very similar to Dutch elm disease, which wiped out probably 99% of the elms. There's very few left. But then from a population of 5%, how many of those are going to be resistant to other types of disease? So you have a very narrow population that then is susceptible to something else. So yeah, it's a shame, but that's the thing with Mother Nature. It's very adaptable, and the ash will bounce back, but it may take several thousands of years, which in geological time is just a blink of an eye. With global trade, so we're introducing pathogens into environments where they have no resistance. So that's why these diseases manifest. Again, what we have with horse chestnut is a particular man-made problem, in that they suffer with bacterial canker, which is a disease of the bark and cambium of the tree, so the water transport and sap transport system of the tree. Now, horse chestnut's not a native. It's from the Balkans and was introduced into this country in about the 16th century because it's an amazing park tree with the flowers and everything, very large trees, very attractive foliage, and was a highly regarded parkland tree. So lots of them were planted, particular Chestnut Avenue in Bushy Park. But the problem being is that with native populations, there's a great deal of genetic diversity. When trees are planted or introduced into a country, it might have a very narrow band of population, which then has been propagated on. So the gene pool for the trees is very small. So let's say 50 trees were imported and were used to propagate more trees. That population of trees is very, very limited. And what that led to was a susceptibility to the bacterial canker. So what you'll see, and it's frequently when you walk down Chestnut Avenue in particular, you'll see dead tree, dying tree, dying tree, happy tree, dead tree, dying, 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 dying. So one or two of the trees have got genetic resistance to the bacterial canker and will probably go on for another 100 years. But the majority do show susceptibilities to it. Pleasure.
Thank you.